Okay, this lecture is going to be about photosynthesis, but photosynthesis, the non-middle school version. This is more of the college version. So it's going to be important to really pay attention to this. So the overview of photosynthesis, again, is the chemical reaction where you take carbon dioxide plus water in the presence of light, and you'll produce this simple sugar we call glucose, which is C6H12O6, and a byproduct of oxygen. And that's the classic middle school version of photosynthesis, that a green plant containing chlorophyll will produce this usable carbohydrate that stores energy and produces oxygen. Organisms that can take energy from sunlight in the presence of chlorophyll are referred to as autotrophs, and these would be the green plants, different algae, which are multicellular organisms, usually a protist, single-celled, plus some form of a fungi, and of course some bacteria are also that contain chlorophyll can produce and undergo photosynthesis. Where does, of course, it occur? We know that it occurs in that organelle referred to as the chloroplast. It has to have that green pigment called chlorophyll, and it only is found in plant cells, primarily in the higher eukaryotic, but some of the more primitive prokaryotic cells, such as bacteria, also contain chlorophyll. But chlorophyll is the common ingredient, I guess you could say, that all photosynthesis has to have. It doesn't occur in non-chlorinated cells. They have to have chlorophyll. Okay, and of course your chloroplast that you are working on your coloring diagram is composed of many different structures. So it's literally almost a cell within a cell. And one of the theories behind the chloroplast being an independent cell would be that it contains the structure called DNA. So in your coloring diagram, of course, you colored the chloroplast of shades of yellows and greens. You'll want to refer to this diagram. You'll see it multiple times. So again, plants are green because they actually are absorbing all light but the green, and green is actually reflected. Chlorophyll is that pigment that reflects green. That's why we see it as green. So really shining green light on plants will not actually cause them to photosynthesize, as well as shining different wavelengths of light. And chlorophyll plants actually respond better in the reds and in the blue wavelength of light. And if anybody noticed on the new plants, on the plant stand back there, I had to replace one of the fluorescent grow lights, and I used an LED light that is primarily producing red and blue light. And you can see it back there on the top shelf of the African violet stand, if you haven't noticed. So the idea that the green light is being reflected, that's for pretty simple physics. We see color because light reflects back. All other color is absorbed, and we only can see the reflected light. Where in the chloroplast are we going to find the chlorophyll? Well, they're located in that structure within the chloroplast called the thylakoids, which I have colored green here on this diagram. So thylakoids contain chloroplasts, therefore they're the green part of the chloroplast that you can actually see under the light. So other structures that you can find in the chloroplast would be the lamellae, or on your diagram it's labeled as the stromal lamellae. I colored them yellow, and you can see them here in this diagram. They actually connect different thylakoids together. They kind of act similar to the bones in a skeleton to hold pieces together. And again, the whole idea is for photosynthesis to occur. So the two chemical reactions that photosynthesis undergoes, it's actually a two-stage process. One is referred to as the light-dependent reaction, and the second stage is called the light-independent reaction, which is the Calvin cycle. So photosynthesis requires sunlight only for the first stage. The second stage can occur in darkness. as we will illustrate here in our so this graphic here illustrates the complete process of photosynthesis, and it can actually be looked at in two parts. This would be the light-dependent reaction. This would be the light-independent reaction. We'll talk in a lot more greater detail about how this works, but basically arrows pointing inward mean that you have a reactant. Arrows coming out would be a product. And like I said, I'll go through more detail on this in a minute. So in the light-dependent reaction, the ingredients or reactants are going to be water. We need a light source, of course. It can be natural or artificial. And you need two energy compounds. So energy also needs to be in the form of a chemical compound, and it will be in the compounds of NADP and ADP. What will be produced out of the light-dependent reaction is an energy compound called ATP and NADPH, which is, as you can see here, nicotinamide adenylene dinucleotide phosphate. And the big product that comes out of the light-dependent reaction would be oxygen. The light-dependent reaction, it has to have light, hence its name. This is where light is necessary to begin photosynthesis. It is our first stage of photosynthesis, and it actually takes place in the thylakoid membranes. This is the area of the chloroplast that, of course, chlorophyll. So in our reaction here on this graphic, what we're seeing here for stage 1, which would be this top half here, approximately. So the reactant is water, sunlight. Notice which way the arrows are pointing. They're pointing down. And also, since these are pointing down, I need ATP and NADH to be input into the system. Coming out of this light dependent reaction, in photosynthesis I will produce oxygen, but I will also produce this compound here and this one here, NADP and NADP coming out. So, but the key here is this is the stage of photosynthesis that light is required. When we move into the second stage of photosynthesis, which is referred to sometimes as the Calvin cycle, light is not necessary. This can actually occur later at night when the lights are off or the sun has gone down. Here, the energy that's necessary to drive this actually came from the first stage in the form of ATP and NADPH. Energy is still required, but it's now coming in the form of a chemical energy versus a light source energy. Where this will occur in the chloroplast is in that fluid-filled region of the chloroplast called the stroma. It's going to take place in the stroma. A lot of times this is referred to as the dark cycle, or as we also know, the light independent reaction, stage 2 of photosynthesis. In the Calvin cycle, what you are requiring to need to start this, of course, is carbon dioxide is required. This is where carbon dioxide is necessary. The source of energy is going to be ATP or NADPH. It's not light energy. It will produce this simple sugar we call glucose, which is chemically C6H12O6. It's a simple monosaccharide, the building blocks of all carbohydrates. And you will see here in the final kind of summary that in the stage 2 here, we're going to go in with carbon dioxide. We also need these chemical compounds coming in. They came from the light reaction. They came out of the first stage, and then they will produce as products sugar, and it will produce these products here, which fall back into the light and then get kind of, they literally get kind of cycled back around and form this ADP and NADPH. On the focus notes on the video about photosynthesis. He goes into great detail about how ATP is broken down and ADP is built up into ATP. It's a cycle that he'll talk about, that you'll get more detail on, that I'm going to present here. This is just kind of an overview, illustrating that we have two stages here of photosynthesis: the light dependent, and then we also have the light independent process. So here's a nice little graphic that illustrates within the chloroplast itself what's happening. That, remember, stage 1 occurs here in the thylakoid, whereas stage 2 is occurring out here, all out here in this fluid-filled section called the stroma of the chloroplast. So equation-wise, our simple equations. Here is our simple middle school equation, but this equation actually summarizes both stages because the products here are different. This product is actually produced in the stage 2 of photosynthesis, whereas oxygen, of course, is produced in stage 1. So it's a little more complex than what you learned either in sophomore biology or in middle school.